Chris, if you're comfortable, I'm going to shut off the videos of the people who do not have their videos showing right now. So you can see the 7 board members a little better.
That sounds good.
Okay. We are recording and we do have YouTube running, so whenever you are ready to call to order, as soon as everybody gets in, we can start.
Looks like we're just waiting on Ananda. Oh, and Ollie, yep.
Can we change Ollie's name again?
I will do that as soon as I see her video. I've just asked her to make her video live.
Okay, great.
Okay, Ellie, I'm gonna change your name, okay?
Yeah, why is that showing up like that?
You have to be logged in as Sandy.
Yeah,
I'm
whose
definitely-
laptop are you using?
Definitely logged in as me because I'm on my calendar invite.
Might be logged into Zoom as him.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm just seeing it like that. 1, 2, 6. I'm not sure if Ananda's going to be here, Gloria. So you may want to go ahead and start, Chris.
Okay, Gloria, do you want to start off?
Yeah, you called the meeting to order. Let's go ahead and call the meeting to order.
We're just, I'm sorry, we're just reconvening. Thank you.
Reconvening, I'm
We
sorry.
didn't adjourn the last time, so.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. Chris, thank you for stepping up in transition and leading operations through the transition with Kate leaving. And just wanted to let the board members know that I have formally assigned Chris as our chair of operations work group for the year. So Chris, thank you for stepping up and taking that on.
Thank you, Gloria. I appreciate it. And I'll probably make a mistake or 2 or 3 tonight. So just tell me to do it right if I mess up. All right, well, we've already called the meeting to order. We have a full agenda this evening. We're talking about the draft preliminary budget for 2020-21, which we will be voting on at the regular June board meeting. We are also going to get an update on the referendum and have an opportunity to discuss that. We need to decide by or before the August regular meeting whether or not we're going to put 1 or 2 referendum questions on the ballot. And finally, we're going to talk about some upcoming potential changes to the employee handbook. And depending on what happens with that collaborative process, we will likely be voting on handbook changes sometime in the near future, during the summer months likely. So we have a whole bunch of agenda items tonight that lead to action in the near future. So that's where we're at. Let's begin with approval of the minutes. I move to approve the minutes from the operations work group public input session dated April 13th, 2020. Can I get a second?
Second, Gloria.
Anika, your advisory vote?
Aye.
All those in favor, raise your hands, please.
Aye.
Aye. And that passes 7-0.
Thank you.
6-0.
Oh, sorry, 6-0.
6-0, yes, thank you.
Sorry about that. Next motion, I move to approve the minutes from the operations work group meeting dated April 13th, 2020. Can I get a second?
Second by Nikki.
Thanks, Nikki. Anika, your advisory vote?
Aye.
All those in favor, raise your hands, please. And motion carries 6-0. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Kelly should be joining us momentarily, but as she comes in, I wanted to introduce the next item of discussion, which is the draft preliminary budget for the 2020-2021 school year. At the April regular board meeting, we released this draft preliminary budget. And we've been working on this budget since the fall, and we're now in the part of the process where we normally listen to the community, amend or tweak the budget as we need to in response to what we hear, and we vote in June. And in a normal year, that vote in June pretty much is what we vote for in October when we vote on our final budget and tax levy. This year is anything but normal. While we will continue that process of listening to the community, making tweaks to the budget as needed, things are going to look different this year. Whether this is your first budget as a board member or your fourth budget as a board member, I would say that this budget cycle is going to be a new experience for all of us. Unlike past years, we are facing a wide range of uncertainties that are beyond our control. The state is likely going to pass a budget repair bill in June or sometime this summer. And we don't know right now what kind of impact that's going to have on our operating budget for the coming school year. We know that we are eligible for some federal grants to help us cover the cost of this pandemic, but we don't know exactly how much funding we're going to receive or when we're going to receive it. And we don't know how long this pandemic is going to persist, and we don't know what school's going to look like in the fall. With all that in mind, as approaching this year's budget, I encourage all of us to really hone in on the things that we can control instead of getting very stressed out about all of these things that are beyond our control. One example of something that is solidly within our control is the decision of whether or not to go to an operating referendum and how much we ask for in that referendum, while the decision as to whether or not that passes lies in the hands of the electorate. We get to decide at least whether or not we make the attempt to stabilize our budget with a referendum vote. We also get to control the amount of flexibility that we put into the June draft preliminary budget going into the summer and fall, so that we have some wiggle room to adapt to all the uncertainties I just listed before we vote on a final budget at the end of October. This year, it's very, very likely we're going to need to make substantial changes to the budget before the October vote. And the more flexible our budget, the easier it will be for us to accommodate whatever kind of instruction we can safely undertake in the fall and whatever funding cuts we might get from the state. So on that note, I'm going to hand it over to Kelly.
Could I just say something before you go, Kelly? I would say yes to everything Chris has said. And I just want to say that we're really focusing on our students and our equity work. And I know that Kelly will bring that up as well. But we're working to protect our classrooms, to make sure that our kids who have been through this unusual experience are going to be best served by our resources this year. And I just want to say Kelly and her team have worked really, really hard along with Chris. And we know they're going to be more work because we're going to have more options. We're going to have to tweak it more, as Chris has said. So thanks for your flexibility and your patience as we work through this. Kelly?
All right, thank you, Chris. Thank you, Jane. Those are wonderful opening comments, so I'm not going to repeat them. The meeting objectives for tonight are to kind of review the timeline for phase 2 of the budget work that we're doing. As Chris mentioned, this phase might look a little bit different for us this year than it has in the past, and so I want to hone in on that, make sure we're acknowledging where those differences are, and that everybody's kind of on the same page as we lead into June and on into October. We've started our budget engagement process, as is typical for this time of year. Give you a quick update on where we are with that and where we're headed before we meet next in June. And then we've received some questions from the board regarding the April, the release of the draft preliminary budget back in April. So I've got a slide for each of those questions, but of course I'll take other questions as board members may have them too. And then we'll finish up with next steps. So we always start our budget meetings by putting our educational equity policy in the room, make sure everyone's minds and hearts are in the right place and that equity is leading the budget work as we continue some of the tough choices that we'll have to make in the upcoming months. And of course, our strategic framework guides the direction of our district, putting our goals first in support of students and our thriving schools. So as we hone in on the timeline, I'm going to spend a little more time here than I have in the past because this is the phase 2 timeline. In April, we released a draft budget as we promised. Today, we'll talk about the community feedback gathered thus far, and new for us in this particular phase of the project will be to talk about the impacts that COVID has had, not only on the 19-20 budget, but on the impacts that then has on the 2021 budget. There's still a lot of unknowns, and we'll have to acknowledge that through this work. And we'll continue working through the unknowns into June, hoping that we do, if there is going to be a state budget repair bill, that we get it by June so we can close out that work in June. If not, we'll have to be prepared to continue working on this budget through July, August, and September as we need to, all by October leading up to finalizing the budget, finalizing our estimates. That includes our enrollment, our state general equalization aid estimates, our property value estimates, all to get ready for a final vote in October. But as a reminder, our June preliminary budget vote is the budget that we implement and start to operate from on July 1. So it's critical that we are ready to vote at the end of June because that is our operating authority for July 1st moving forward. So you've seen this slide before. This is our budget process. We have been through all these steps together. As a reminder, we really started this budget work back in September this year in order to lay the groundwork necessary, diving deep into the work in January. Together, we've agreed on budget goals and guiding principles. We've taken revenue assumptions, we've projected enrollment together. We've put together some assumptions around our compensation strategy, our staffing plans, our strategic priority actions, putting equity first in the classroom, our healthcare decisions, and some difficult decisions along the way. And now this phase of the work is such that we go back and validate all of our assumptions. That is what phase 2 is about. It's about validating the work we've done thus far and making sure it's the work we all want to vote on in June. Now, this is where some of our unknowns come in. So the second bullet around revenue projection, this time of year should be pretty stable. We're in the second year of a biennium budget, and it should be pretty gosh darn fixed. Unfortunately, it's not for us this year due to the impacts of COVID. And our revenue assumptions, which were about $7.8 million, are now potentially in question. And so as we have to kind of re-review our revenue assumptions, that means that all the bullets following that, as we work through our plan, might need to be reevaluated as well. And so that's the work that we'll be doing together over the next 2 months and as needed into July and August. This is just a quick recap of what was in the April budget. We did not do an April presentation, so just kind of wanted to take this opportunity to remind everyone of what is in the April budget. Now, this is the operating budget, Fund 10 and Fund 27, and that's where the majority of our spending for our students and our staff comes from. You'll see our revenue is up 1.7% overall. That's primarily driven by the revenue authority, the $179 per pupil in the budget. It's also primarily driven by the 4% increase in special education for the reimbursement aid that we had previously anticipated. Those two revenue sources are the two that are in primary question right now as the state budget repair bill moves forward. And we could see that revenue go down to zero by the time the state budget repair bill is done, or worse, we could actually see that revenue go negative on us. So that's what we're watching right now, is that particular top line. Our expenditures then would need to follow. Currently in the April budget, we've already made difficult decisions, including a $3 million reduction in staffing and a $3.8 million change in our healthcare plans and in our employee percentage contributions. That gave us a negative 0.2% kind of reduction in our budget already in August and April and the difficult decisions you've made. If our revenue were to decrease moving forward, those expenditures then would need to follow to ensure that we have a balanced budget. So that's what we're keeping our eye on. Our property tax forecast that was built into that April budget is already a mill rate decrease for our local property tax owners, a decrease from $11.10 down to $10.87. That's a mill rate decrease of 2%. If our revenues and our expenditures were to decrease, the property tax rate, the mill rate, would likely follow, and that mill rate would likely drop as well. So additional items that we'll be paying attention to as we rebalance this budget. If this April budget were to be able to hold and our revenue sources were to remain, that would mean that it would be a 2.86% increase in the levy overall, driven by those revenues, particularly the revenue limit increase. But with that said, the revenue limit increase really only accounts for a 0.4% in our overall budget. 2.4% of our increased tax levy is due to state programming entirely out of our control, including already planned loss in state equalization aid, a percentage change in the open enrollment rate itself, and increases in both the enrollments in our non-MMSD charters and private school voucher programs, along with state increases on the rates of which we pay other entities that are not part of the Madison Metropolitan School District. So all things that are really important to keep in mind as we talk about, get feedback on the April draft preliminary budget. So we've already gotten a couple focus groups kind of underneath our belt. And as a reminder, we have taken a strategy for feedback similar to we did 2 years ago, largely simply due to the constraints we have around COVID right now. So we pulled all of our superintendent advisory groups back together. Our parent advisory group and our principal advisory group have met between the release of the draft budget and today. And the feedback coming from both groups are really pretty similar. We're hearing general support for our strategic equity projects, a lot of confirmation that the equity projects that you all built into this budget are the right projects and are in line with equity vision of the district. We're hearing support year after year for our mental health programs. We're hearing a lot of support for the K-5 literacy materials that are built into the budget. A lot of understanding of kind of some of the root causes potentially being in those literacy materials. And by far and away, similar to other years, we're hearing a lot of support for our Grow Our Own programs and our accelerated licensure programs. The community is really kind of resonating with the need to solve some of our challenges around diversity hiring, particularly with teachers. So that is coming up time and time again. Overall, between the parent and principal advisory group, there was some fairly good understanding of our overall budget constraints already with the budget work that you've already done and some general concerns around the budget that we might be facing going forward. So there's also a lot of kind of anxiety amongst our parent and our principal groups, kind of waiting just like we are to hear what might be coming. Through that conversation, class sizes came up. But what I can say is this is my 4th year in feedback sessions around the budget, maybe even the 5th. And class sizes always come up. Whether you're with parents, teachers, principals, there's always a bit of a worry that class sizes kind of will start to climb. This year was a little bit different. We really kind of pushed the need for equitable decision-making in a limited and kind of scarce resource environment. And what really came out was the focus on class size, lower class sizes at our lowest income schools. Kind of this repeated ask to make sure that we're paying attention to our lowest income schools and where we can prioritizing class sizes around our lower income schools. Jane was in both of those meetings. Jane, do you have anything else to kind of add to some of the summary notes?
No, I think you captured it well. I think in general, I was very impressed with the level of understanding in both the groups about the budget and various positions and the intent of the district. So it really was kind of reinforcing to the work that the board has been doing to hear from them. We have a couple more to go, as Kelly is saying, and then we'll see if there are other places where we can garner some additional public input, but I think these groups kind of are representative of who we would want to get feedback from.
Yeah, we've reached out to the Black Excellence Coalition and some other groups too. As Jane said, hoping we can get a couple more kind of scheduled. These are the two that we know are actively being scheduled, likely for next week already.
Kelly, can I just ask something really fast?
Can I have 1 minute? I'm going to open it up in just a little bit, Nikki. I think I just have you in one more slide.
Okay.
So we talked to you all about kind of our challenges with releasing a survey around the budget this particular year. By my count, I think we've released 4 surveys in the last 3 weeks out to the community in various levels of feedback on virtual learning and devices and MSCR surveys. And so kind of one more survey was not our recommended approach for this particular budget. We don't generally get great responses in any case. But what we did do is our research and development team did a great job of going back and looking at all the feedback that we've received throughout the year and on the feedback that we received in the previous budget year. Looking for supportive trends and feedback and priorities on the budget. And while this information was obviously collected previous to the impacts of COVID, the priorities that are coming out of our community kind of remain steadfast. And while everyone's aware of our budget impacts, kind of what they would prioritize first, second, and third seems to continue to be pretty consistent. So we thank the RAD team for pulling this report together. It's attached to these materials and hope you have a chance to review it. The main feedback themes that are coming out of all these different sources collated together is just a consistent preference for direct investment in school level resources and student supports, including the mental health programs I've mentioned before, and student-facing programs. Programs like AVID, for example, continuously come up as an example of a student-facing direct investment. In addition, we continue to see strong support for direct strategic equity projects, support for continuing the Black Excellence Coalition Fund, kind of continued questions around how that's being used and how that might kind of gain momentum up into the future. And then again, we see efforts to recruit teachers and leaders of color as a top priority coming out of all the different input sources there as well. And you'll find more information on that in the report when you read it. So I think I'll pause here. Is this where you want me to pause, Chris, to take questions? I know I've got one for Nikki waiting.
Yep, I think this is a good pause point. And Barb, could we take down the slides for just a second so I can see if people raise their hands?
Yep, here you go.
Thank you.
Hi, just one question. Can we make sure the disability group, I believe it's the parent advisory group, also be included on that?
You got it, Nikki.
That's all.
Are there other questions for Kelly at this point? Kelly, I just have a quick question about the budget input link on the MMSD website. I assume that is still live and it will be open for a while if people want to provide budgetary input through that means.
Thank you. I was going to cover it in my next steps, but this is a better spot. Yes, if you go to the MMSD website, you'll see flipping on the first page, budget input. So you can click on that, it'll take you to the budget page where the full budget book exists and a feedback button. That feedback button will remain live until the first week in June, where we collect all the feedback. And I will give you another update on what we've learned based on that input and our other focus groups that we've had. So it's kind of two times an opportunity to report out on it.
Thank you. Ananda?
Thank you so much, Kelly, for the presentation. I had a question regarding the class size and in particularly around, we have moved virtual. Fall is this mix of uncertain, we may come back, everybody may come back, we may come back partially, no one may come back. So we have like this really large spectrum, but I'm wondering how, and I know that a lot of your input precedes COVID, but I'm wondering how the conversation has evolved around the size of virtual class. That's it. Yeah.
Jane, do you want to take that or
Mhm.
Lisa?
Yeah, Lisa, you can chime in here too. So, Ananda, we are just this week beginning to look significantly hard at what the fall will look like. We kind of planned the close out of school and how we're looking at how we're going to actually close the schools down. We're getting very close to summer school and understanding how that's going to work. So that's our next big step in this. And there are lots of configurations to look at. And so there may be differences in class sizes and ways that we approach that, depending upon what we do with that. So I know that Lisa has been working a little bit more closely on this and guiding some of our thinking. We still have more research to do, for sure. And there, as other districts are figuring out more what they're about, we'll be finding out more about that. I think there is guidance coming from the state. So we'll want to make sure we move that into our planning as well. But Lisa, do you want to add anything to that?
No, Jane, I think you hit on the most important points. And I also just wanted to say that we'll be gathering some feedback from students, staff, and families about how they're experiencing virtual learning that will hopefully inform those back to school decisions. But know that we'll always be grounding those decisions in the health, safety, and well-being of our students and staff first.
Yeah, so I think that the probably the easiest place we are right now is talking about class size as we know it, because it's in our handbook and that's the conversation we need to have more immediately. But it's a good point, Ananda, because it's going to be very, very different.
Yeah, thank you, Jane, and thank you, Lisa. I know, Lisa, you and I have been talking a lot about this, so I appreciate that. I'm wondering though what is the public perception, because I have heard people say like, well, now that you have virtual classes, it makes sense to have more people. And it doesn't translate, the same as to have a case, the teachers to have a caseload. And if we have, what is the message if we end up having not 100% of physical space moving forward? What does that look like from a budgetary perspective, right? We're still building a budget as we're going to have 100% utilization of our buildings. If that doesn't happen, given that there's not going to be a lot of cost saving from a physical space perspective, and I appreciate the report illustrating that, but what is the message then if we're saying there's this, in this school or in this grade level, we're not going to have in person, but what is the narrative from a budgetary perspective around that? So that, we don't have to answer that now, but I just wanted to, that's where my brain is going as I'm seeing everybody trying to figure out the same thing that we are. So
thank you.
Thanks,
No, thank
Ananda. Chris, you had your hand up. Did anyone else have their hand up? All right, Chris, take it away.
Yeah, I just wanted to build off of that question by Ananda. As you're starting to work through scenarios for the fall, can you tell us what the timeline might be for us discussing those issues and figuring out those pieces as they sort of come forward? If you figure out, 5 different scenarios and they each have a budget potential connected to them, when do you see those conversations happening?
So I would like to have, and I think maybe Ananda, you had brought this up too, but I've been thinking about this. I'd like to have a time to update you guys on an ongoing basis because, and maybe it's at the very beginning of a board meeting or, whenever we come together as an instructional work group, just to say where we are, because right now we don't have a timeline in essence. That's one of the things that we'll be building into our planning starting on Wednesday. And so much of our timeline is going to be in relation to external factors that we may not know about until we know about them. So I think, and we can think about this, there may be a different way of working that would help you more, either through the weekly update or through, a quick update at the beginning of each board meeting to kind of tell you where we are and how far we've gotten, what our thinking is, if that would be helpful.
Yeah, I think that would be, and I guess I'm just thinking the urgency around when we have teachers leaving essentially, in the spring and coming back in the fall, and how those conversations and that planning happens over the summer, and making sure that, the staff and the schools have input on this as we're trying to figure it out.
Yeah, and what I will preface all of this with is we are doing our best to make concrete plans and create timelines, but we have to know that they will change based on health and safety factors. And, some of the scenarios we're seeing are we may go in and out. We may have to be flexible in terms of what our timelines are and how we do things going forward. So I would say that the health and safety needs of our kids and our community will be the guiding force on that, and we'll have to adapt to whatever is called on for us to do.
And I want to say I have appreciated the adaptability, the flexibility, and just how much hard work has been going on around this. That's really appreciated. And just, continuing, that vision going forward, and that focus on students and schools is important. So thank you.
From a budget, can I get in there real quick on that? From a budget timeline perspective, I just want to be clear that while it may be unusual for our way of working to make budget changes in August and September, like usually we lock in June and it's practically what we approve in October, this year might just be different. And I think Chris's opening comments kind of hit on that a bit. We might need to make budget changes in August and September to make our October budget really look like the way that we're actually working in the fall. And I think that's just a piece of this particular phase 2 that is going to look different for us, is that the plans will come but may not be ready by June. And we might have to adjust the budget by the time we approve it in October. It would be typical for other school districts. It's just not typical for the way we work. So we're just probably going to have to adjust a little bit.
Sadian, why don't you go ahead since you haven't spoken yet?
Yeah, I just wanted to stress the amount of uncertainty that we are within in terms of looking towards the fall and even the summer to an extent. And a lot of that uncertainty is just allowing our public health organizations to take in as much data as possible to give guidance on what's a safe way to conduct school in the future. And, we've got to be humbled by that uncertainty.
Ananda?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that Lisa and I have been in communication pretty much on a weekly basis to see what we can bring. Aside from, I think there's the updates. I think to Savian's point, the limitations on our updates, right, as the state is trying to figure it out. This week, we had like 3 different pretty extensive documents being released around from a public health perspective and like, recommendations and whatnot for like us coming back. And then of course, districts across the country are trying to figure out the same things, like which grade level to bring. Some are prioritized elementary school, others are prioritized high school. There's lots of pros and cons around this. So, I think the conversation with central office staff, which is like, we need to do a lot of studying about this, and we need to give time for that studying to happen. And I'm looking forward to having a more comprehensive conversation when we know a little bit more about where things are at. So I really appreciate Lisa's team and Callie's team, like getting a really good handle of like how this is unfolding, and the flexibility that Jane has been, Jane's leadership around all of this, and trying to manage all of the uncertainties as Savian spoke extremely well. So thank you, everyone. I just want to let you know that like the instruction committee's been kind of looking at it and trying to figure out how to also frame, right? So we're not like just saying like we don't know what's happening, because we do need to have a plan. So yeah, thank you, Chris, for that time.
Are there any other comments before we move on? So Jane, I want to thank you for your willingness to provide us with regular updates about what's going on. I really like the idea of doing that before maybe all of our board meetings if we need to. You know, so much of how we move forward is based on the public health response to this pandemic. Like if we have really solid contact tracing and testing in place in the fall, we might be able to get back in our buildings. If we don't, we might not, and we just don't know at this point. So I think staying flexible and being constantly updated so that we can respond is absolutely critical for us. And on that note, Kelly, back to you.
All right, so we've already started to dive into kind of like the question and answer period here, which is great. So I'll just take a step back maybe so we can move forward a little bit. So what do we know about the state budget repair bill? What don't we know? And where are we at with impact? So what we know is that the state is facing a budget shortfall of somewhere between 1.4 billion and 1.6 billion based on different news kind of reporting. We know they'll likely pick up a budget repair bill discussion sometime middle of May, maybe next week or the week after even. And then we'll hear lots of information going back and forth into June. We know that public education funding projections are likely to be impacted. And that's because public education is one of the largest spending items for the state. And if they've got to close a budget gap that big, they're likely to look at public education. We also know that the board has already made a number of difficult decisions in this budget. You've already cut between $7 and $8 million in just trying to get to the April budget point. And so that we know that moving forward is going to be even more difficult in this current year. We don't know where the cuts will exactly come from or to what extent and how deep they will be. Kind of by our projections, kind of $3 million, even to $9 to $10 million is possible. And so we will start scenario planning and we will dive deep into those scenario plans in the June operation work group, hoping we'll have more information. But we all know what the key levers of this budget are. We started those conversations in September. We'll go back through, as I mentioned earlier, looking at all the various decisions we made around the budget and identifying what might need to change. We also don't know the timing of the budget repair bill. We may see it as early as June, which will help finalize June budget decisions. But I think there's a pretty good chance that we'd also see it in July, which means that the June budget will have to be made on assumptions. And then we'll use the October budget to finalize the decisions that we made. So it will be important that we remain flexible with each other. I wrote a memo supporting the impacts of the COVID-19 simply because I was getting so many questions from so many different angles that I thought it was kind of maybe the best way to try to put it on all on paper. It got a bit long, so I apologize for that. But in summary, you know, there's a lot of conversations, Ananda already alluded this, to all the savings that people think we might be having right now. And I think it's really important for people to realize that school districts are a human capital organization. 83% of our budget goes to people and benefits. And our mission is to educate kids, support students and families. And that's exactly what we're doing right now. All of our employees are working. All of our employees are supporting students in their academic learning and families as needed. Even employees who might not, you might not think of, like, what are they doing right now? HR has done a great job of identifying all the work that every single employee type is doing right now. And a lot of them are flexible, and it's new work that they've never done before. And everyone's working in new ways and supporting kids. But what that means is there's not a ton of cost savings. Utilities get mentioned. Yep, there is going to be some savings tied to utilities, but a lot of our costs are going to be deferred, meaning a lot of the orders aren't necessarily going in right now, but we'll see them in the fall when everybody kind of tries to start getting back to a new normal. We've also have lost revenues that we need to be thinking about. MSCR is not collecting membership fees right now. Food service is not collecting meals from the adults paying staff or are paying full pay students. Summer school, based on the decisions that are made, we're likely to see some decreases in revenue there. And my office is very deep in fee returns, whether it's from MSCR or from our students and our families for events, activities, music, rentals of equipment that never happened. And so we're also paying fee returns back to families right now. So there's a lot of lost revenue to be considering as well. What we have done for this current year is put a number of controls in place to try to limit our spending, to kind of protect our fund balance by the end of the year as much as we can. So we put a purchasing deadline in place on April 30th. It's not unusual for us to put a purchasing deadline in place, but pretty strict this year, where no purchases will be coming through the purchasing department after April 30th unless reviewed, vetted, and approved. Similarly, my office is reviewing every purchase over $3,000. And we're looking at all the P-card expenditures in a much more granular way to ensure that what spending is happening right now has to happen this year in support of kids and in support of immediate learning in order to kind of protect this balance, this budget as much as we can. And largely that's because we've needed to repurpose our budget for other items that were otherwise unbudgeted. So for example, we've had the printing of materials right after the March 12th COVID kind of shutdown of schools so that we could get academic and enrichment materials into students' hands. Our online virtual learning, getting that up running, that includes delivering the devices to students, putting a system in place where we fix the devices when they're broken, deliver a new one. Our Wi-Fi, of course, this board knows all about like that particular purchase to ensure that every student has access to the academic learning that's happening right now. Nonetheless, all the cleaning and safety procedures and protocols that have already been put in place and will continue to be put in place as we get ready for fall. So there's a lot happening in 1920, but my main focus is trying to kind of protect this budget right now while making sure that the great work for students that is happening across the school district is still supported. So then we start to look at 2021. As we meet in June and as we rebalance for the October budget, there will be new costs that need to be identified. And Ananda and kind of Lisa and Jane's conversation already highlighted some of that. Some of that timing may get before June, but some of it may need to happen later on in the summer and the fall based on just planning cycles. We know cleaning and safety supplies is going to be a new budget item, much higher than in the traditional kind of environment. Our Wisconsin retirement system rates, something people don't think about, it's largely based on the market. And with where the market is right now, we have to budget for an increased rate. And we'll find out that rate much later in the year, but by the June budget, we'll have to be able to count for that. And then it's the instructional strategies that'll be put in place by the team that we'll need to consider for the budget. And then we're going to have to think about lost, damaged, and repaired Chromebooks. They're going to be at much higher rates than when those Chromebooks sit in our own schools and under our own supervision. So those are just some of the things that we're thinking about that we're going to need to be preparing for that back on March 2nd weren't even on our radar. And then, of course, I know the board has a lot of questions around the Wi-Fi data plans and what it might look like if we have to extend past that 6-month rate, the 6 months data plan for the devices that we've ordered. Good news is we've purchased those devices. It's the data plans that we may need to consider extending. So that would be something else that would be an additional impact on our budget. So looking forward to 2021, we may see a decrease in revenue and we might see kind of an increase on the expenses to support the new COVID environment. And balancing the decreased revenues with some of the new expenses is going to be the tough work. We're going to have to be looking at what areas we can reprioritize in the current budget in order to make it all work. So much more in the memo, we want to make sure I highlight those key things. And then I just wanted to touch super quick on fund balance. There's been a lot of conversation in the about public schools fund balance in the paper lately, highlighted by some of our legislators. And basically what we just want to make sure you all know is that fund balance is really just a point in time at the end of the school year, a reflection of our assets. It's not a checking account and it's not all cash. What we do use it for, though, is to ensure that we have a cash flow throughout the year. So we receive our property taxes very unevenly throughout the year. We receive one pretty large payment in January. What happens is we spend that down, but we don't have enough to make up for payroll at all times of the year. So we get to the later months in the year, October, November, December, and our cash flow starts to really dwindle because we don't have the property taxes in yet for the year. So we use our fund balance to pay payroll. What that does is it keeps our short-term borrowing down, which keeps our costs for borrowing both the fixed cost it takes to go out to borrow and the interest rates themselves for having to repay the borrowing back. And the lower our borrowing costs, the more money we have for operating expenses like teachers and salaries. So we always aim to keep that low. If we were to use fund balance and just have to drain it down this year and next year because of lost revenues, it means it will cost us more to borrow. Therefore, our borrowing costs digging into our operational budget. So using fund balance at a time like this to cover reoccurring expenses when we're seeing our revenue drop from the state is a really challenging and not a recommended way of working. Our board policy recommends a 10 to 15% general operations balance. We will end the year in that range this year. It may drop just a little bit, but we'll need to watch that going forward too, because all of our bonding agencies watch that fund balance and they watch our fund balance percentage. And if our ratings were to drop, that then would also make our short-term borrowing much more expensive, making us take additional hits on the operating budget just to make short-term borrowing and cash flow work. So just want to make sure that's on your radar. I have sent you a really good FAQ that one of the trade organizations put together, just so you had additional talking points and understood the basics of it a little bit more. But I think that was just a nice update for you. Next steps to finish this up before we take questions. May 1st through May 31st has been designated as kind of the board amendment process. It typically is for the budget, meaning if you have any amendments to the April budget, you would submit it with your idea and your approximate cost of what you think that might be. My department, along with Lisa's and HR, would look at it, analyze it, and then when we get to our June operation work group, us as a team would review those amendments all together and decide if any of them need to be input into the June budget or not. And that's typically the June operation work group conversation. Since we have so many unknowns in the budget, it's a little hard to know how to balance the board's amendment process. So I'll kind of open that up for a question right now about how the board wants to handle the board amendment process. We don't typically open it up again after June, but if the board wanted to forego the amendment process for now, I could see potentially opening it up like in August when we know a little bit more information, if that's what the board might like to do. So I'll leave that as an open question for you. But again, we have a June operation work group where we'll take additional input from the community via public comments. We'll finalize the budget, the big decisions, impacts that we know of thus far for the budget repair bill. You'll see that I marked that June 8th or 15th for the operation work group. I really just want to pay attention to where we are with the state budget information, and if it makes sense to move the meeting back to the 15th so that we have more information and can have a better plan for you. I'd like to keep that as a possibility as well, and then we'll vote at the end of the month. So
Kelly,
Chris,
I
that's
think
what I have to say.
I think the meeting for the vote is the 22nd, is it not? Or is it the 29th? The 29th is the last Monday, but on our calendar it said 22nd. Barb, do you know? I mean, we can get it cleared up later. It's either going to be the 22nd or the 29th.
Yeah.
The 29th would be the very
22nd,
last
I'm
opportunity.
sorry,
Do you know?
22nd is correct.
Okay. All
Okay.
right. So that's
Got it. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
All right, thank you, Kelly. I think we're moving on to questions at this point. I want to start out the questions by just reiterating that this budget is the board's budget. And the board has the right to amend pretty much anything that we vote on, whether we're voting in June or whether we're voting in October. That is our right as a board. At the same time, I do want to put out there that this is going to be a really, really difficult budget. And putting amendments on the table that make it harder for us to be flexible in October might make it make this budget even more difficult if we suddenly face a severe cut from the state or if we don't have an operating referendum or both. So I would like to go into this discussion trying to keep flexibility at the forefront, as well as the fact that this is the board's budget and we have all our rights as board members to to act as public officials and do what we think is in our best interest. And so with that in mind, what do folks feel like the amendment process should look like moving forward? I would really like to hear some feedback on that, as well as just your general questions about the budget process this year and the budget itself. Could we take down the PowerPoint so I can see everybody raising their hands? So Nikki, I saw your hand up and Ananda, so let's go with Nikki first. And I think you're muted, Nikki.
Mute. I'm not saying what I want to do in the budget yet. I just have a quick question to Kelly, which is because the tax rates have been delayed till July 15th this year for property taxes. Is that going to affect our rates, and how does that affect us?
Nikki, that is such a good question. I have it on my list of topics to cover in June because I don't know exactly yet how it's going to affect us, but it will. Ultimately, it's going to affect our timing of our cash flows. That is very related to the fund balance conversation we just had. There's a good chance. We typically borrow in October, and there's a good chance this year we'll need to borrow earlier. I'm potentially keeping my eye on August for when we might need to do our short-term borrowing. And that's because we won't receive our funding from the state on the same timeline because of all the delays. We have a couple conversations and meetings planned to dive deep into this. And I'll be prepared by June to answer it for sure, but I am kind of keeping my eye on August. But I don't know if we'll have to borrow more quite yet. We got to wait for the June year to close.
And Chris, may I ask one thing quick too? And that is, I want to get as close to COLA as possible. I realize that the 1.0 is as close as we're going to get without a referendum, but I want to keep the 1.0 for as much as humanly possible.
All right, thanks, Nikki. Ananda, I saw your hand.
So I wanted to just say I really appreciate, Chris, you framing this meeting in a way that is supportive of this really big decisions. And when you prompt your question, I was like, that is the question that I have too. So I don't have necessarily an answer. I actually have more questions. But one that I think it's coming up for me is I'm wondering if there is a way to scaffold the budget in ways to say, here's what we know 100% or close to 100% for sure. So we can look at that in a way it's like, oh, this is likely not change, or if it's change, if it's going to be very little. And then all the way to like, here are the things that like, there's so much uncertainty to it that it's hard, to sort of think. I think that to me, my brain, I don't know if I'm being clear in the way I'm asking, but in my brain, that would help me kind of know how much flexibility we're looking at, and also how much we need to be nimble to be responsive. I guess that's my comment. So.
Ananda, I really appreciate that. And it actually made me think of another possible scaffolding thing, and that is our budget amendment process. I'm wondering if there's a way that we can scaffold amendments. We usually use our amendment form and we submit amendments and we put all the amendments on the table in June. And I'm wondering if there's a way to run this process so that we could, on the budget amendment form, specify if we really feel like this amendment needs to be on the table in June, or if it could be on the table in the summer, when we possibly know more about what's going on with both COVID and with the budget. Is that something we could do, Kelly?
Absolutely.
I think that would be really helpful. And also, in that scaffolding process, I think it would help to think about if we do amendments in June, do they increase our flexibility? Do they decrease our flexibility? Do they keep it about the same? And try to be cognizant of not putting things on the table that could make it really hard to deal with a deep budget cut that would come after that vote. Ollie, I saw your hand.
Yeah, I really appreciate the flexibility around what the amendment process can look like and what it looks like to try to navigate a budget that is kind of designed to shift pretty drastically in a variety of directions. And so I think in consideration of all of that, I think one of the more important factors is just our ability to communicate around adjustment fluently, and to be able to communicate that adjustment to one another effectively, but also to the general public. So folks don't feel like this process is so divorced from other processes that it creates additional confusion.
Gloria?
Yeah, and then I think that along with the amendment process, is I think, you know, what has happened, what I don't want to happen is what has happened in previous years, and we can't afford to let happen, is wait until the last minute, right? So I'm really happy that you are really leading us and guiding us to really come up with what that process looks like. What we can't afford is to have amendments come at the last minute due to political pressure. And based on the needs of organizations. I mean, we are in a very budget sort of strict budget right now, and it's going to be very challenging. We just cannot, we're not going to be able to fulfill the needs of organizations that we currently fund, all of them, right? And so I think we can't allow that to come into this process late in the in our decision-making process. And so, because I think that totally throws us off. And so I really want us to commit to developing and agreeing to what that process is, not letting politics and, you know, guide our decision-making, and really have a focus and being fiscally responsible in how we're going to manage this very tight budget year.
Let's see, anyone else? We haven't heard from Savian or Christina or Anika. Any comments from you? All right, well, oh, thanks, Chris. Go ahead. Chris, you're still muted.
I think also maintaining that flexibility is really important, as we are with other parts of our budget. So maintaining the flexibility around amendments too is important going forward.
Savian, did you have anything to add?
No, other than I think we all just have to be self-aware during the amendment process that it's not like other budget years, and we are more constrained amid uncertainty than usual. So,
Anika, did you have anything to add? Well, any final comments? Seeing none, I want to thank Kelly for this extremely helpful presentation. We will have another opportunity in June to dig into the budget a little bit more deeply. I don't know if things will be that much more certain by June, but at least we can go into that vote with as much confidence as we possibly can that the preliminary budget will get us through the summer months and leave us in a good position to have an October budget in place that responds to COVID and the state. I also feel very heartened by the fact that as difficult as this is, this board and our community are united around two top priorities, one of which is we have to protect children and classrooms and all of the services we provide to children in classrooms, and we need to protect our investments in equity. And so knowing that pretty much everybody agrees on those things, I think it makes us easier to address the uncertainty and move forward in a way that we can all hopefully, stand in solidarity behind a budget. So thanks, Kelly. And let's move on to our next agenda item,
Thanks,
which is the referendum. So Kelly is, I assume Chad's going to join us. Over the past couple of months, our community has experienced a great deal of pain with COVID. And MMSD has stepped up in really significant ways to make sure that our kids continue to be educated, that we continue to feed kids and provide them with social services. Because we have made this decision to really step up and put kids at the forefront and make sure that we're not asking our community to, we're being empathetic to the pain and the hardship being felt in our community, we've postponed our vote on going to referendum. We were originally going to do that in March. At this point, we haven't set a date. However, we still need to make a number of decisions around the 2 referenda we're looking at. One is, do we want to make changes to either the capital or the operating referendum before we vote? And the second question would be, when will we be ready to vote? So with those 2 questions in mind, I would love for Kelly and Chad just to give us an update, and then we'll have time for questions.
Thanks, Chris, for that introduction. I can get us started, and then Kelly will wrap us up and kind of talk. I think more details on the operating referendum and related timelines. So as you mentioned, we were only a couple weeks away from actually voting on the entire referendum package. And in some ways, I think it's probably a blessing that we had a chance to pause and kind of collect ourselves to make sure we were making the right decision and didn't even either have to redo a vote or stick to a vote that we weren't sure on. So as a reminder, we got together at the March Operation Work Group. We had a referendum package that was very close on the operating side, and I felt like was essentially in the can when it came to the facilities referendum. At that meeting, we agreed in principle for the most part that we'd stick to that $315 million mark on the facility side and discussed the possibility of adding another $2 million towards healthy and sustainable projects at all of these schools for a total referendum on the facilities capital side of $317 million. And as you guys can see, we didn't put together slides for tonight because many of you have seen these multiple times. We wanted to give you time for discussion. So a quick reminder on the facilities portion of the referendum that it really, in my mind, was 6 main pieces. A reinvestment of $280 million at our 4 comprehensive high schools, and that was a total of $280 million. A rethinking and reimagining of the Hoyt building to consolidate Capitol High School from its 2 current sites, which are far less than ideal, back to Hoyt with a budget of about $6 million. And then the possibility of a new Southside Elementary School that we are estimating at $29 million, likely including a land purchase. And then that added $2 million for sustainability and green aspects to these projects. Just a few other updates. The work, at least in my world, hasn't stopped. So the board did approve a partnership with Findorf, and we have been working steadily since that operation work group to continue to hone in on cost estimating and slight changes to the projects kind of behind the scenes to make sure that we were on as far as budget went. What we wanted to make sure didn't happen, and I feel so good about the fact that we brought Findorf onto the team, was that we didn't want to make sure that we overpromised and then under-delivered post-referendum when it came to what was actually in these packages. And we feel like these are still very solid plans. And quite honestly, the situation around these projects hasn't changed since March. Our schools are still in desperate need of improvements and maintenance and reimagining those instructional settings. If anything, the need around Capitol High and that Southside School has it possibly even grown. We've talked about the gap growing even during these times where our students are separated from our staff. I did want to just give the board a quick update on my perspective, and I had Findorf help me along the way with this around what's actually happening on the K-12 construction side over the last couple months, and it's, I think, kind of changed drastically. As a reminder, we are not losing track of the fact that this is a huge ask. This was a big ask of the community before COVID-19 hit and before we paused all of these decisions. But there are some pieces lining up. If the board were to decide to move forward with a vote and the community backed what the board had in mind regarding the capital side, there are some things working in our favor. And Kelly will mention this again. So number one, interest rates are historically low, near 0% interest rates on what will end up being an investment that will pay off for decades. Two, there's a large number of school construction projects that will wrap up over the next year and a half just in Dane County. And we've walked you around the school districts around that border our district, and to a district, they are all building right now, and we'll have school construction projects that we'll be wrapping up. And what that means is available contractor help and available general labor that would likely provide an incredibly competitive bidding market when we sent these projects to bid. A few other things just to take note. Historically, low petroleum prices mean lower costs for school construction or just commercial construction. As a reminder, we will be putting hundreds, if not thousands of people to work in Dane County if these projects were to go forward. So I guess I just bookend the fact that we are not losing track of the fact that this is a giant ask if we went with it and the community decided to support it. But we believe there are potentially decades of payback on what these projects could turn out to be. I guess one way to think of this is if you are in the market to buy a house, the last time you want to buy a house is when the prices of homes are inflated and interest rates are really high. And the time you'd like to buy it, if you can find a way to afford it, would be when the market is a buyer's market and interest rates are really low. And we believe we would actually be entering a market that would be much more favorable than even it was a few years ago. So I will leave it at that. We're here to have some dialogue and answer questions. Kelly's going to give us an update on what the lay of the land is on the operating side, and we're here to hopefully have some interesting discussion.
Yeah, I'm going to actually stick with the facilities on the finance side before I move into operating. We've had some questions about if any of our projections of what the costs on the average homeowner, if they've changed since potentially some of our economic environment has changed. So we ran some models for the $317 million, the last number we were talking about back in March, dropping the equalized property value assumptions. We were assuming 5% for this last January, which is closed, and we should get those numbers somewhat soon. But then for the following years, 4%, 3%, 3%, 3%, and that's the growth in Madison. So we are already projecting really conservative equalized property value growth. Madison's been growing at 7-8% clips. So we've been projecting 4% and 3% out on the future. It was already pretty conservative. Nonetheless, we ran the models again, dropping them down to 1% and 0% for every year after that. And though we included the new interest rate assumptions as well, ran those two against each other. And ultimately what happens is the interest rates look better for us, and the equalized property value looks a little harder, and the two really equal each other out when you run it in a couple different models, which I tried it. So for example, when we ran the last model back in March for you, it was $140 per year for the average homeowner, but the facilities referendum itself would cost the average homeowner $140. We reran it and it was literally $140 again, right? So the two are just equalizing each other out even after I move all the assumptions on the facility side. So hopefully that gives you just some comfort in those assumptions that the model being tested a couple different ways, because these two things are working, one for us and one against us, is really evening out. On the operating side, So we left our conversations on the operating referendum, the ask of the taxpayer to increase our revenue on a reoccurring basis. We left March, I believe, in a consensus of potentially going to referendum for $6 million for 2021, $8 million for 21-22, $9 million for 22-23, and $10 million for the last year of the 4-year cycle, which was a $33 million ask. That was already a decrease from what we kind of launched our feedback period last October, which was an 8-8-10-10 or a $36 million reoccurring ask. So you all kind of dropped that number, that ask, down to $33 million cumulatively when we all met in March. So had we voted in March, it would have been the 6-8-9-10 model that we would have had prepared for you to vote on. So we ran that same 6-8-9-10 again with the new equalized with a lower equalized property value assumption of 1% for next year and 0 for all the following years after that. And again, it's actually similar. We don't have the interest rate, but it's also a much weighing it down. So it's also a much smaller kind of cumulative dollar amount. So back in March, I told you that the 6-8-9-10 model was an $80 annual incremental increase over the next 4 years for the average homeowner. So $80 incremental increase over the next 4 years for the average homeowner is what I told you in March. And rerunning it with those new numbers in the model, it was $82 per year for incremental increase over the next 4 years. So again, it did change, but very slightly. So probably not, worth worrying about too much because it did change by such a small dollar amount. But want to make sure we ran it and we considered it. So kind of with that in mind, we've heard some really interesting things about the operating referendum lately, and I'm going to ask Chris to kind of report out what our advisory group had to say a little bit in just a minute. But I do want to remind the board that we are empathetic to the overall economic status of our community right now, and we know that it's weighing heavily on everyone. And that we will all keep that in our minds as we make decisions moving forward. I had presented back to you in March of a 4-8-9-10 model. So potentially asking for $4 million in 2021 instead of the $6 million. If the board was interested, that model would still be on the table. Of course, we don't know exactly what's coming from the state yet. And so a $6 million ask for 2021 would be a bigger insurance policy against what the state might be bringing us this year. And frankly, 21-22 isn't likely to be looking much better from the state revenue collection standpoint. But a 4-8-9-10 model is something to consider. And if the board ultimately chose that you didn't want to go to referendum for operating, you could consider doing a 0-8-9-10 model, particularly if we really ended up in a lucky scenario where our budgets weren't cut at all from the state. A 0-8-9-10 might be a model that you consider if we don't have any impacts from the state at all. Like I said earlier, I don't think that that's likely. I do think we're going to get state budget cuts in the next couple weeks to months. But the board always has the ability to under levy. So you could go to referendum for a certain dollar amount, and then if you didn't need it, choose to under levy. This board has had examples in its history and in its past where they under levied at least 2 years in the last 4 years that I can think of. And that is a strategy the board has as a tool as well. You always have that power to under levy. So I want to just put that out there as an option. What we're kind of looking for you from tonight is any questions you might have of us, knowing what you need from us in general to get ready for kind of your vote. We're kind of interested in hearing what each of you are doing to kind of get your word on the street and get your information from your networks. You all have very strong and deep networks. It's one of the major assets of this particular board, I believe. So we're really interested in hearing what you're hearing on the street too. Chris, do you want to kind of let everyone know kind of the advisory committee maybe had to say a little bit?
Yeah, I'll give a really quick recap of that meeting. We got some really good feedback from our referendum advisory committee last week. Overall, the group was positive about continuing to go to referendum. Nobody in the room said, don't do this. There was a very strong acknowledgement of the fact that our community is hurting, that this has been incredibly hard on many families and individuals in Madison, and we have to be empathetic to that fact. At the same time, it has also shown a very bright spotlight on the fact that our schools do much more than educate kids, and the fact that we have really stepped up in a big way to not only make sure that our kids are getting an, continuing to get an education during a pandemic, but we're also trying to serve our kids' needs for meals and social services. It really shows what an important role as a social safety net public schools play in the community. And with that in mind, it seemed like the group was very, very much in favor of continuing to go to an operating referendum, especially given the fact that state budget cuts are quite likely in our future. It allows us to continue the investments in all the things that we are doing right for kids. And it helps to ensure that our kids don't suffer as a result of cuts at the state level. There was also support to continue with the facilities referendum. That was much more supported because of the potential cost savings, because construction costs might be down, interest costs might be down, fuel costs might be down, that even though it's hard to ask the community for money right now, it's a really good time to make the investments in our facilities that could actually, in the long haul, help us to stabilize or increase enrollment, which will cut costs in this district. So that's the short version of what we heard from the advisory committee. As we go into our discussion, and I've got a list of people who've raised their hands, I want to make sure that people know that we have to decide if we're going to put 1 or 2 questions on the ballot by our August regular meeting at the very latest. We can decide to vote in June or July. We're not going to be ready in May, but we could do a June or July vote if we wanted to. And if we voted in June or July, we would still be able to go in and amend that vote in August if something changed radically in the community in those intervening months. So voting in June or July doesn't mean we don't have any flexibility before that August deadline to decide if we want to put something on.
Chris, could I just put out there, as far as the timing of when the board actually meets and when the regular board meeting actually is, the August 17th, which would be the Monday before the regular meeting, would really be the last day we recommend. The last minute in time is the morning after the regular board meeting. And I'm just afraid there might not be a lot of time to turn around to the city what we need if the regular board meeting was the day that we voted. So our recommendation would be the last possible day is August 17th.
So a special meeting at that point is the last date. So when discussing this, on one hand, I think we absolutely need to take into account all of the uncertainty we're facing in making this decision. And I also think we need to consider the fact that voting on the referendum does provide us and our community with a degree of stability, just in terms of knowing that we're moving forward to stabilize the budget or stabilize our facilities plans in certain ways. So there is some tension between our need to be responsive to whatever pain our community is experiencing, whatever the fiscal limitations they might be facing are, and our need to show that we're trying to stabilize MMSD in this really difficult time. So on that note, I saw Savian's hand first and then Nikki, and just continue to raise your hands as you have questions. Go ahead, Savian.
Yeah, I think going through a pandemic, which is already exacerbating so many disparities across the board, now is not the time to cut back our investment into public education for our students and our teachers. Going into March, there was a sense that this was really needed on both sides, the operating and the facilities lagging behind other districts, and the potential detrimental effects that not going into operating would have. And after COVID, it's just underscored even more how badly our public schools need this investment from our community. And I think we have a responsibility to be honest about that need. As we take on more information, especially concerning the state budget shortfall, we might have to recalibrate. But I still think we have a huge responsibility to be honest with the community that we still need to make this ask because it's our job.
Nikki, go ahead.
I'd like to amplify what Savion said. I think now is not the time to cut back, and I understand on the financial. Anything we've learned on COVID is a school is important and does a lot of things as a building. It does even more with our teachers. A building can't provide food. A building can't always provide everything a student needs. A teacher and a staff can. That's why I'm more for the organization, more for the operational than the, I can't think of the word, I apologize, than the second referendum that I'm blanking on the word on. But very simply, what it comes down to is this. We have to see what does our community need and what doesn't want. Well, we have kids who need to eat. We have a board who believes in equity and getting rid of achievement gaps and working on strategic equity programs. We have record lows on construction materials. I think we don't have a choice but to go to the 2 referendums. The operation referendum is essential, but I do want our buildings to be able to provide what our students have, what our students need. One thing I don't want is that the most marginalized continue to stay marginalized. And I'm afraid if we don't pass this, that's what's going to happen.
Thanks, Nikki. Gloria, did I see your hand? Okay. Ollie, go ahead.
Yeah, so Kelly, I want to speak directly to your question. I really appreciate you and Chad and the amount of work you all have done and the level of agility you've brought in, particularly in the last 6 weeks. I think in terms of what I'm hearing from folks is it's a pretty mixed bag, right? Like I know people who are impacted in a lot of different ways and are really trying to navigate their immediate financial reality in a pretty strained situation. I also know a lot of parents who are so ready for when we're ready, just waiting for us to be ready to be back in business and to the best of our ability, and are more invested in public education and how important public education is. And I also think that folks are able to see opportunity in this moment. And I think Madison is a community that embraces change and embraces smart solutions. And I think that because you all have been really thoughtful in looking at our facilities and what our facilities really need, and kind of the urgency and immediate need to create that plan and address our facilities with a lot of integrity and a really sound plan. And I actually went back over all 4 of the booklets we got for schools. And I mean, these are not things that I think we should be putting off in a very serious way. These are real things that, we are talking about the integrity of our district. And so I am in more support of the referendums than ever. And I think our community is ready to get behind them as well. And I think what we need to take responsibility for right now is making sure that folks have all the information in order to make informed decisions.
Ananda, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to elevate what my colleagues already said, and then thank you, Chris, again for also the update you sent it to us, and for taking really copious notes from what was said in the space. I feel like I have been really consistent with the need to the investment. I think I really appreciate the thinking, the framing from Kelly and Chad around the relevance of investing, in particular at this time, given the interest rates and given the need, given the sort of the financial aspect that might be sort of supporting, you know, more than what we were, you know, potentially in a much more salient way than it was when we first start having this conversation. And also to say that, like, you know, what Nikki and Savian brought up around, we won't know exactly the impact of COVID, the extent of the impact of COVID until, you know, sometime next year. And it looks really gleam from many different directions. So I think at this point is, you know, I'm in full support of continuing to invest to the full extent. The two referendum, and yeah, to ask to the degree that we can our community and the support of our community. So thank you all for that, for echoing those voices and for all the work around the framing. I'll say the same thing that I said the conversation before, to say, like, I'm really excited about also how we're going to communicate that to our community, right? When we think about so many COVID relief funds happening out there, and the community realizing the needs of people that they may have not even know existed in their community, right? We're talking about undocumented folks. We're talking about folks that have very different needs in regards to accessibility to the community. We're talking about small business. We're talking, you know, so and women, incarcerated individuals, you know. And so I think that, like, you know, just highlighting the way in which we communicated about this, I think is going to be crucial for our community's success. Thank you.
Gloria, Chris, and Anika, did any of you have comments at this point? Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd just like to echo the sentiment of everyone else. I really understand the importance of these referenda for our district and the investments that we need to make and that we're asking the community to make. I think having, when I was campaigning, you know, earlier in the year and was still able to go out and knock on people's doors and talk to people directly. I mean, one of the things that I heard from taxpayers was, you know, please consider the amount of taxes we're paying. Please be aware, you know, if I'm retired, you know, it affects me in a different way when you are continuing to raise taxes. And so I just feel like right now, I feel like we need a little more time. I mean, we have until August to vote on this, and I feel in the next month or two, we're going to have a lot clearer picture. Well, hopefully at least a little bit clearer picture on where this leaves us. I'm not saying I'm not supportive of these two referenda and the importance for our school district, but given the uncertainty with the economy and people losing jobs and not sure how this is going to rebuild, I just want to maybe say we need a little bit more time to discuss it as we go forward. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does make sense. Gloria, go ahead. Oh, are you not done, Chris? Or?
Yeah, I was just going to say I'm supportive of it. I'm just a little bit more cautious, and just like the flexibility that we need around the other aspects of the decisions that we're making and that's being impacted by COVID, I think we just maybe need to have a, you know, watch this one too as we go forward.
Thanks, Chris. Gloria, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I'm aligned with what Chris is saying. I think, you know, I am in support. I was in support and continue to be. I'm just very cautious, and I think you know, I'm not sure where our community's at, right? I mean, I think some are. You know, I think we got some great feedback from our community group. But I would really like to hear and maybe gauge a little more on where our taxpayers are at. And I don't know, Chris, if you plan on talking about the poll at all during this meeting.
I could, or Kelly might be able to. We have talked about doing an additional political poll to see if the past 2 months have changed where voters stand. So Kelly, I don't know if you want to say more about moving forward with that.
Yeah, I think kind of the main question would be, you know, the needs of the school district haven't changed in that our buildings are still there and still 100 years old and falling apart. If anything, the needs of the school district, I think, have increased. And I think this conversation supports that. So if those things haven't changed, the purpose for going to a poll would be to test if the economic considerations of our voters have changed, right? That's what's changed. If the board feels like getting information from the taxpayer in a scientific way, right, other than kind of our own circles, a poll would be a more scientific way to do that. They would, you know, get a 400, you know, participant group, intentionally diverse, intentionally representing the voter base here in Madison. And it could give the board information about the vote and the kind of economic constraints of our citizens. So if that information is helpful for you to decide if and when you're going to vote or how you're going to vote, or if we need to change the scope of the operating referendum, I think it's the best way to get that information, because Chad and I can't go on a 60 meeting community session right now to get you that information. So if you need it, I believe that's the best way to do it. And so if you're interested in moving forward, we would probably move forward just to at least get a contract or something going fairly soon.
And then, you know, I think our community group, advisory group did support a poll in our conversation as well. So.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Nikki, and then Ananda, and then Savian.
Okay, 3 questions. How much is the poll going to cost? Actually, 4. Who are we hiring to do the poll? Are we hiring them local? Are we hiring consultant? Who is writing the questions on the poll so that we know it to be diverse? And how are we distributing the poll? When we have a large group of people that don't have internet, and we still have people who are afraid to get the mail with COVID. I'm just worried about results and usage.
Sure. So Nikki, back in October, you would remember that the board did a poll. And we followed all the procurement processes for that poll, getting the quotes and whatnot, with a firm. Their name is ALG Research. They did the poll for the board back in October. We would use that same poll because it's a follow-up to the same poll. We're not redoing the same exact poll, right? We're asking for the information we really need to validate that the previous poll still stands, or that something has changed that the board needs to reconsider. So we would use them again. And that would be typical of any of our procurement contracting processes. It cost us under $20,000 last time. I would presume that it would be less than $20,000 this time.
And who is writing the questions and how are we disseminating?
So the firm themselves writes the questions, but the questions, just like last time, last time it was Kate and Gloria who worked directly with the polling company to review the questions and edit them. This time it would be Chris and Gloria who worked directly with the polling company on the questions themselves. And then you had a question about mail and internet. They typically do polling questions by phone calls, and they have phone numbers from the voter base registry.
And can the whole board participate, or does it only have to be, or is it only 2?
This is something that needs to be done on a pretty expedited period in like working together. So we would recommend 2 board members would take on that work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ananda.
So Thanks for the conversation about polling and surveying our community. I think I mean, I'm in full support of always bring the people that are going to be impacted by our decisions and having their voice at the table. However, I think I'm not an expert in surveys, but given that pretty much every month our landscape change, I don't know how effective a poll would be. I mean, it may be effective to measure like a particular window of time, but it might not be really like helpful for us to like figure out what is going to happen in November, because from now to the summer, from the summer to November, like it's so much, may change. I think we're also in a state that has a lot of polarizing issues and a lot of dissent. So, we never know how state policies are gonna impact our in a local level, what's happening in regards to, opening business and whatnot. So I'm not certain. I'm not certain that a poll will give us a very clear picture of where people are thinking. And maybe let me retract this and say maybe the poll is going to give us that sort of temporary decision, but given that we're like in this sort of quicksand situation, I don't think that I don't know if this is going to be really beneficial. And it might be distracting actually, than helpful. That not an expert opinion, but that is my 2 cents around that.
Yeah, I think, I would support the idea of the new poll, but I wouldn't be surprised if nothing changed. I think if you look at the Dane County crosstabs for the Marquette Law School poll over the past year, Dane County has consistently supported spending more on taxes in favor of public schooling. That's been really consistent in Dane County polling, and I would expect the same. I do want to emphasize that if we do decide to vote on the potential referenda in June, we can always go back and amend it, the questions as new information comes in. And, I just want to emphasize that before COVID happened, we all understood how important these referenda were to our equity projects. If anything, I think COVID has underscored the importance of all-day 4K, has underscored the importance of a new school on the south side as well, how much more important that is. And as board members, we have to be champions for those projects and upfront and honest about what our public school kids need and what our public schools need. So, yeah.
Gloria.
Yeah, I think Kelly said it great. I mean, I think perfect. In that it's not questioning whether we need it, right? We definitely need it. Like I'm on board. We definitely need it for our equity projects. We need it for all the great work that we're doing. It's just given the economic instability and what this does to our taxpayers, I just had to say that I think we have to also be responsible, right? And figuring out is this the best route for our taxpayers right now, given people losing jobs. Who knows when we'll be able to go back to work? Housing market. We're so unstable right now, and I think for me, I definitely vote yes, given where our needs are and our community support for public education. I don't think we lack that. I think what the issue is just, our economic instability right now with COVID and wanting to just take this one step, who knows what it'll give us, right? It may or may not, but, maybe it'll give us something. And so that's what I guess I'm looking for. And Savion, like you said, I mean, like if it's the same, it's the same, but then it's the same, right? Then we can move forward. And so, yeah.
Ollie and then Nikki.
Yeah, so I think the earliest we would vote would be in June, and I really appreciate your facilitation, Chris, and letting us know that we still have the ability to make adjustments in the long term if we make a decision as early as June and want to adjust that decision based on kind of the rapidly shifting nature of this current moment. I think it's really important. You know, a lot of times when we talk about passing the referendum, we talk about what it looks like to pass them, what it looks like to make the ask of the community. We haven't spent a ton of time talking about what happens if we do not pass them. So I've said over and over again, there's two questions. Can we afford to do this? Can we afford not to do this? And when you talk about people getting laid off, MMSD is not exempt from that. If we can't afford to pay people, then we lay staff off. Then we see schools change in significant ways. And obviously we do the best to mitigate the cost to teachers and the cost to kids. But, you know, if we're gonna have the conversation about like whether we do this or whether we not, we really have to look at the factors on both sides. And I think there's some real serious consequences of not passing both referendums that if we're, you know, that we need to have that conversation with the community as well, is this is what it looks like to not pass them.
Thanks, Ollie. Nikki?
My issue is this: I think we should vote in June or July. I think, again, we could always go back, and I appreciate Savion for raising that. But the reason why I'm hesitant on a poll is not that I'm hesitant in people being involved. I'm not. What I'm hesitant on is spending $20,000 in a budget year that is incredibly tight, and where we're looking at every penny and every dollar and how that's going to look optically when we're trying to pass a referendum and asking for hundreds of millions of dollars. I don't know if we want to do that. I think that might just, it might, well, I don't know if I could swear on camera, but it might tee people off.
Chris and Anika, did you have anything to add? Go ahead, Chris.
I guess I just want to add that I brought up the slow down, let's continue to talk about this, because the conversation seemed to me like it was let's go for it, and it sounded like we were actually almost deciding tonight. And so just wanted us to, you know, consider those factors. I completely agree with everyone that the needs of our schools have not changed, and we do have a lot of needs, and we do need to ask for this investment from our community. I just want to give us a little bit more time, which you all have very, you know, you gave us the flexibility to do this, and we're taking the flexibility that we have down the road in these other areas, and I think we continue to do this, and we'll probably know more in a month when we're back talking about this again. And so I appreciate us being able to decide this as we look at June.
So Kelly, I just want to sum up what I'm hearing and make sure that you have the information you need to move forward before our June operations work group meeting. First of all, I'm hearing some sentiment that we don't want to move too fast, but I'm also hearing June and July as possibly good months to take this vote, with the caveat that if things just like blow up, we could in August go in and amend our vote before we decide to put this on the ballot. I'm also hearing, you know, in terms of what do people need to know before they vote, the one thing I heard very clearly is where is the community at? And with that said, I heard mixed opinions about polling. So I want to know, first of all, do you have enough of a sense about timing, given that you and Chad have to do all the work of preparing for a vote whenever we decide to take one? And do you feel like you need a stronger sense of whether or not we should move forward with a poll?
Yeah, so I can take, I mean, the poll is really kind of the board's decision. I'll take that offline with board officers. We'll see how the board wants to move forward. It's kind of the role of board officer, so I'll take that up there. June or July is a fine space for Chad and I and communications and team to be gearing towards. We don't need a date on a calendar today, but knowing that that's our general direction is always helpful. So I think we got what we needed tonight. Chad, did you get what you need?
Yeah, Chris, the only thing that would change drastically for me is if at the last second we decided to change scope on the projects. So we have exactly what we need out of the board tonight, and we'll kind of wait for next steps. So great job facilitating it, and just let us know how we can assist in you guys getting to a final decision.
Before we close this out, I'm wondering if you could give us any kind of a preview of things we should be thinking about before we sit down and talk about this again in June.
I highly encourage you all to use your deep, vast networks to get your own input and your own feedback. You all have incredible networks that got you elected that I'm in awe of almost every day. So I encourage you to use those because they're probably far and beyond what a survey or something that we could probably pull off in the short term. So I just encourage you all to do that, and hopefully you can come to the table in June with some of that feedback to share.
All right, well, Kelly and Chad, thank you so much. This was a helpful discussion for me. I hope it was for you and for everybody at the table. And we will change gears now. Our last topic on the agenda is the employee handbook. And I assume Heidi and Deirdre are going to come and help us, give us a preview of that process.
I'll just jump in here for a second. Yeah, this will be one of several conversations we'll have on this. And so tonight is really just a general overview. And so just to have you think about the process again and some specifics and actually some conversations we've had in the past over past meetings about the handbook. So Heidi?
Yep. So this is, like Jane said, it's just kind of an update. Pre-COVID, our goal was probably to be coming to you now with items that we had reached consensus on with our employee groups. But because we had been meeting, all of our subgroups had been meeting prior to the school closures. But once the school closures occurred, we agreed with the employee groups to hold off while we were trying to get the virtual learning up and running. So now that that seems to be pretty well set, we're going to again proceed with meeting again and trying to come to consensus on whatever changes that we're looking for in the handbook. The areas of continued discussion are going to be around surplus and layoff, emergency closures, planning time, the handbook revision process. We had other items that we had been discussing. A lot of them, though, had budgetary impacts. And given the state of the budget, which you have been discussing all night tonight, we know that those are really not things that we're going to be prioritizing at this time, given all the uncertainty. So basically, our goal is to continue meeting as subgroups, try to agree on language changes. We will then be looking to bring those back to Jane by the end of the month, and that way we can get them to you in June. Any questions? Savia?
That was a thumbs up.
Oh, cool. Great.
Any other questions for Heidi? Thanks so much. I want to remind everybody that the handbook process is a really intense collaborative process. And that's actually one of the things that makes MMSD special, is that we're very committed to collaborating with our staff and coming up with a handbook that hopefully everybody is happy with. And so I want to thank Deirdre and Heidi for doing that work and for continuing to keep us updated as that process unfolds. Sivian.
Oh, sorry. Before we close out, I just wanted to say great job on running your first operations work group. And wanted to wish a very happy birthday to our colleague. Happy birthday, Ali, as well. So, yeah.
Happy birthday, Ali.
Yes, happy birthday.
Happy birthday, Ali. Kelly, before we close out, I have a quick process question for you, if you're still there. And my question is, between now and our June operations work group meeting, if people have budget questions as they're going through the dense budget book, is the best way to get them to email, or is there going to be a question form where people should submit questions?
Yeah, very good question. So if you have questions on the budget, please email them to me and I will put them in what I lovingly call the budget tracker, which is where I track all the board members' questions and responses so we can track them between now and October. Because oftentimes the same questions tend to take on a life of their own for 4 or 5 months. So it's just a good way of tracking the conversations. So please send them to me. We will revisit those that are across the board in June. And then the budget amendment process, I have that feedback from the earlier conversation. So I'll push something out in the weekly update as a reminder on the process and the form, thinking about the conversations you all had about scaffolding. So I'll build that out and I'll release it to you for your kind of amendment process consideration in the weekly update.
Thank you, Kelly. I really appreciate that. And I encourage everybody to send in lots of questions because the questions actually, I think, help all of us frame our thinking about how we're going to move forward. On that note, can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Okay.
All right, so Nikki moved, Ollie seconded. All those in favor, say aye and raise your hand.
Anika?
Aye.
Oh, Anika, your advisory vote, I'm sorry.
Aye.
Motion passes 7-0, and thank you, everybody. See you
Thanks, Chris.
soon.
Thanks, Chris.
Nice job, Chris. Thank you.